Halloween has always been my favorite holiday. As a kid, I loved the decorations, the candy, and the thrill of walking through my neighborhood at night, dressed as something spooky. Even as an adult, I never outgrew the excitement. Every year, I went all out, decorating my house with fake cobwebs, carved pumpkins, and eerie red lighting. But after what happened a few years ago, I don't celebrate Halloween anymore. Because that was the night I realized that some horror stories aren't just stories. It started like any other Halloween. My little sister Emily begged me to take her trick-or-treating before I met up with my friends for a horror movie marathon. I agreed, figuring it would be fun to walk through the neighborhood and soak in the festive atmosphere. The streets were filled with kids in costumes, parents chatting on porches, and houses glowing with orange and purple lights. Everything felt normal, until we saw him. He was standing in the yard of an old abandoned house at the end of the block. At first, I thought he was just part of the decorations. He was tall, dressed like a scarecrow, with tattered clothes, a stitched-up burlap mask, and an old hat pulled low over his face. He stood perfectly still, arms stretched out like a scarecrow nailed to a post. His presence was unsettling, but it wasn't unusual for people to set up creepy decorations to scare trick-or-treaters. I nudged Emily. "Creepy, huh?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, but why is he staring at us?" I glanced back, feeling a shiver crawl down my spine. The thing was, he wasn't staring at us. He had no eyes, just two dark, hollow holes in the burlap mask. And yet, it felt like he was watching. Trying to shake the feeling, I laughed. "Relax. It's just some guy trying to scare people. Come on, let's keep going." But as we moved from house to house, something strange happened. No matter where we went, he was there. I'd glance back and he'd be standing across the street still as a statue. A few houses later, I'd see him at the end of the sidewalk, always just far enough away to make me question whether he was actually following us. I told myself it was just a Halloween prank, some guy getting a kick out of creeping people out. But the longer it went on, the more uneasy I became. At one point, I stopped and turned to face him, half expecting him to move, to wave, to do something. But he didn't. He just stood there, motionless, under the flickering glow of a streetlight. The air around us felt wrong, like everything had gone still and the noise of the Halloween crowd had faded into the background. Emily tugged on my sleeve. "Can we go home now?" I nodded. "Yeah, let's go." We hurried back, taking the fastest route to our house. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but the Scarecrow Man had disappeared. I told myself it was over. We locked the door, turned on all the lights, and tried to laugh it off. Maybe it was just a guy having fun. Maybe it was some elaborate Halloween trick. But then, later that night, something happened that still haunts me to this day. Emily had gone to bed, and I was in the living room scrolling through my phone when I heard it, a slow, scraping sound outside. My heart stopped. It was coming from the porch. I stood up, my hands trembling as I crept toward the window. The curtains were drawn, but through a tiny gap I could see the porch light flickering. And then I saw him, the Scarecrow Man, standing on my porch, facing the door. I stumbled backward, my breath caught in my throat. He hadn't knocked, hadn't moved, just stood there, inches from my door as if he was waiting. Then, tap, 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 my blood ran cold. It wasn't a knock, it was a light tapping, like someone dragging their fingers over the wood. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then suddenly, the tapping stopped, and the porch light flickered again. I forced myself to look, but when I peeked through the curtain, he was gone. The street outside was empty. No footsteps, no sign that anyone had been there. But the feeling, the terrible, suffocating feeling, lingered in the air. I locked every door and window, barely slept that night, and tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. Just some cruel Halloween prank. But the next morning when I stepped outside, I saw something that made my stomach drop. On my porch, where he had been standing, was a single stuffed crow, its beady black eyes staring up at me. And beside it, carved into the wooden railing, was a message in jagged, uneven letters. "See you next Halloween." I moved out of that house the following year. I never saw him again. But every Halloween, when the porch lights flicker and the air turns cold, I still feel it. That unnerving presence, watching from the shadows, waiting